When entering the world of Middle-earth, it's as if I were a hobbit, belittled and as unknowing as they are, being thrown into a world that depicts to you more than meets the eye. Thus I've begun to venture into the film's subtext and themes, trying to find the primordial point to the Fellowship. Within doing so, it occurred. One does not simply find a main point from this vast and epic tale by J.R.R. Tolkien, for this story has more to it than just the journey from one place to the next. In terms of theme, I feel that there are two juxtaposing themes for each point. In other words, it is without evil, there can be no good, and without fear, there can be no bravery. Tolkien writes that without the high and the noble, the simple and vulgar is utterly mean, and without the simple and ordinary, the noble and heroic is meaningless. And in this, it's understood how Peter Jackson took upon the task of this film, creating a world of contradicting subtexts and themes. Atmospheres of heartwarming beauty to moments of spine-chilling abnormalities that draw in the audience to succumb to the desired emotions. Jackson exemplifies this through the vast use of sheer relatable atmospheric feelings that we as humans subconsciously understand through the use of humanistic traits such as comedy, to appreciate the tragedy when it emerges along the way. As you are also met with the envelopment of the subtle humbleness to fully understand the true grandeur of the Fellowship. The prologue in itself is a perfect introduction to the film, as it takes the audience on an overworld narration through the voice of Galadriel, who we will be touching base on later. The narration of Galadriel is overspeaking the past events of Middle-earth, introducing characters such as orcs, elves, men, and the main antagonist Sauron, all adequately designed to fully suit their themes and the world around them. Orcs being overshadowed by dark rays and the fires of Mount Doom, the corrupted elves of the pre-eras show absolute evil and embody a force that is deprecated of independence. Whilst battling against the fellow predecessors who are constantly outfitted in elegant battle armor with the effects of light rays constantly emitting from behind them, implementing that they are the bringers of good in the land, and that they are also one unified independent force, fighting for the freedom of the lands. Once the One Ring is cut from the hand of Sauron, it is overshadowed that Sauron remains no longer within the world as a physical threat.
Is it secret? Is it safe?
Whilst Gandalf explains the current situation of the ring to Frodo and its history, Gandalf is framed in an extreme close-up to emphasize the severity of the situation, whilst Frodo remains at a mid-shot, trying to grasp the sheer scale of it all. Whilst they converse, Frodo mentions Sauron's demise,
Sauron was destroyed.
which it instantly cuts to an extreme close-up of the ring in center frame, with a flicker in its reflection almost implying there is still life within it. Sinister whispers of black speech are heard exuding from the ring, creating an unnerving atmosphere in which both Gandalf and Frodo realize that this is no longer a conversation between the two of them. This is seen as it constantly cross-cuts whilst they look back and forth between both themselves and the ring. Each shot of the One Ring is in center frame, initially the power shot, exuding the most power of the three of them. This is evident as Gandalf is shown to be on the less dominant right side of the frame, leaving Frodo in the more dominant side, even though he is the one being informed about the ring. This is due to Gandalf being drawn into the ring's evil and temptations of power, which is what creates his undertones of seeming uneasy. Jackson shows this through both Gandalf and the ring, by using an extreme close-up cutting to a full shot of the ring, in center eerily zooming into an extreme close-up, underlining his temptations, whereas Frodo being a halfling, the power of the ring does not draw him in as does Gandalf. This is where it's seen that Gandalf is the most vulnerable person in the room. After understanding the extreme burden that comes with the ring, Frodo demands Gandalf in taking the ring back, which Jackson further shows Gandalf's struggle in the temptation. Firstly, as Gandalf backs away into the darker point of the frame, which is enclosed by the compact home of the Hobbit, creating a sense of entrapment by this temptation. It's then in the cuts where Frodo's face and the adjacent ring is in the foreground being blurred. However, after insisting again, the second cut with the same action shows the ring is now clear, and Frodo is now blurred within the background, creating an overwhelming atmosphere of true struggle between Gandalf's temptation of power and vulnerability to the ring.
To keep it safe.
The Nazgul, Wraith Riders, represented majority of the insight to what corruption can inflict on the race of men. Inciting into the Nine's demise into the darkness, it is shown that they are no longer the independent men who seek out power for themselves, but rather have become the vassals completely dependent on Sauron and finding the One Ring to restore himself to his former embodiment of power. This sheer force scouring the lands is a representation of true terror, not only from the figures themselves, but accompanied by their heart-stopping screams, and ominous soundtracks that create what I feel is one of the most intense and sinister moments of the film, where the hobbits reside upon Amon's Sol, leading it off with the overwhelming shriek from the wraiths in the distance. Shaw flows his score through their shriek, inciting that the theme of the score is the Nazgul themselves, portraying the fear they impose onto the hobbits. Cutting to the overview of Amansal, panning into where the hobbits reside creates an atmosphere of entrapment. This is also implemented through Shaw's score. As the initial beginning fades out as if the introduction's finished, it then transcends into a much darker tone, complemented by a constant build in pace, with the strings to bring out, if not almost imitating the wraith's shriek whilst doing so. The camera is rapidly moving and blurring in and out of the perspectives of the hobbits to create a sense of uncertainty and fear. The panning from the perspective of Sam and seeing the ruined statue of a cloaked man, whilst accompanied by a shriek of Shaw's instruments, is foreshadowing what's to come. Peering over the darkness, Frodo is accompanied by a distant drum, which then instigates a slow-mo effect as he continues to turn to peer into the darkness, knowing in full well that they are here. Greeted by the wraith emerging from the darkness, Shaw's score changes pace yet again. However, it has succumbed to a theme of overwhelming power through the use of a sinister chant and extreme bass. And the sheer weight of the situation is represented by the Nazgul's footsteps as he walks towards Frodo, in which he resides to the back, as he knows that they are only after one thing. After the five throw aside the other hobbits to deal with, Frodo is met with the looming voice of Sauron that lures him into revealing the ring to the Nazgul. Instantly, they feel the presence of the One Ring, which is shown through a panning zoom to the Nazgul's reaction towards Frodo. The score resides for a moment to complement the sound of the ring, as well as giving insight into how the wraiths hear it beckoning to him. Shaw's piece amplifies through the beckoning, creating even more of an unsettling atmosphere, shrouded in disarray, using tempo, rudimentary strings, with the accompaniment of percussion gradually increasing in intensity, assisting the frantic emotions of fear portrayed through Frodo. Entering the other side, Frodo sees what the Nazgul for what they truly are, which is represented by the sudden inversion of colour, which they are still men shown through the glowing white spectral, however the background has become dark, as if it represents the overshadowing of darkness that they have succumbed to. The ring within the scene is forcefully pulling away from Frodo, however it does not change size nor slip from his finger, implying that Frodo's willpower is in part overpowering the rings. Realizing this, the Nazgul stabs Frodo with the blade that was overshadowed by darkness, creating a Morgul wound, which can never be healed entirely, leaving a permanent remnants of darkness upon Frodo that he will have to endure for the rest of his journey. Shaw's score changes as Aragorn enters, creating a heroic atmosphere that constantly interweaves between the Nazgul's theme overpowering the dark undertones that was implemented earlier. Frodo being wounded by the Morgul blade will soon succumb to darkness, leading him to become a wraith. However, in the last moments of Frodo's consciousness, he's illuminated by the introduction of Arwen. The effects of lighting illuminating behind brings forth the understanding that she is the light that will rid him of the darkness that the Nazgul inflicted upon him. Doing so, she juxtaposes the Nazgul through the purity of elves, for they are what keep the darkness at bay, and this is represented best through the scene for the standoff at the river. This same light technique is shown throughout the journey, however it is most prominent in the introduction to Galadriel. Yes, she is the true light within the world of Middle-earth. Entering the banks of the river, the cinematography takes you over the landscape. However, it doesn't take you to their destination. Rather, it foreshadows an alternate path, cutting to the flowing of a waterfall. It then cuts back to a shot of the three boats entering the riverside. However, when all the boats are facing to the bay, Boromir is still facing towards the waterfall, further foreshadowing his downfall. It then cuts to a pan of the boats arriving, showing everyone hopping out as they hit the land, then to reveal Boromir once again. However, through the slight mannerisms of characters accompanied by the score, there feels as if there is an underlining struggle within. Not just Boromir, but Frodo as well. The constant crosscuts only between Boromir and Frodo show within this that there are multiple exchanges of subtle glimpses at one another, creating an atmosphere that is most uncomfortable. Cutting back to Frodo walking up into frame from the boat, the eyes of which are what direct the next cut to Boromir, remaining in the boat looking as if he cannot continue in a way, implying that this is where it ends for him. Whereas when it cuts back to Frodo, it is apparent that he understands what the ring is doing to Boromir as well as the Fellowship, in which this is where Frodo begins making the decision of leaving the Fellowship and to depart on the journey on his own, whereas Boromir is shown being left behind, foreshadowing his later death. The epic journey that is the Fellowship creates a beautiful introduction into the boundless world where every instance is a form of world building, not only through what is shown but is also sculpted through the immense soundtrack of Howard Shore. The develop of countless contrasting themes and subtexts creates a world that is full of both terror and beauty. That is what Middle-earth is. A true world that lives and breathes as if it was a reality. The intricate details around the main point to the Fellowship don't revolve around the journey, but instead revolves purely around the departure and collapse of the Fellowship, and how it comes to happen. Boromir being the final representation of this departure, it is evident that the Fellowship is one to play on your emotions through the use of editing, cinematography, and score that allows you to take a leap and get lost within the world of Middle-earth.